Grain Elevator and Processing Society is hosting their annual Jeeps Exchange Conference at the Kansas City Convention Center, February 22nd through the 25th of 2025. Jeeps Exchange is the biggest and best show in the grain industry with more than 400 exhibitors and 45 hours of education. It is the best place to find grain handling and processing operation solutions all in one place. Jeeps Exchange brings together industry professionals from across the world to help build professional networks and connect with the products you need. Come walk the trade show floor, take part in live demonstrations, innovation stations, and see new equipment. Make valuable connections through a variety of fun and exciting social events. Early bird pricing ends January 28th. Learn more and register at jeeps.com/exchange. Today, you'll get a unique glimpse into the food-grade soybean market. We'll take an in-depth look at the challenges and opportunities this sector of the industry presents. It highlights the pivotal role grain elevators play in the food-grade soybean industry. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Jim Lenz, your host of Whole Grain and the Director of Global Training and Education at Jeeps, where the mission of the Grain Elevator and Processing Society is to champion, connect, and serve the global grain industry and our members. At Jeeps, we look to be the global community and thought leader for the grain industry, which feeds and fuels the world. Thanks for listening today and for joining the network of thousands of other grain handling and processing professionals across the globe taking strategic steps to grow professionally. The Whole Grain Show will give you the competitive advantage to win at work so you can make more of an impact. Today we are talking about food-grade soybeans. According to the recent non-GMO soybean market report, the global non-GMO soybean market is anticipated to rise at a considerable rate during the forecast period between 2022 and 2030. Food-grade soybeans are typically non-GMO. GMO is an acronym that stands for genetically modified organisms. A GMO is a food product that can be changed in some way on the genetic level. Most developed nations do not consider GMOs to be safe. In more than 60 countries around the world, including Australia, Japan, and all the other countries in the European Union, there are significant restrictions and outright bans in the production and sale of GMOs. You may be wondering what food products are generated from these food-grade soybeans. Tofu, soy milk, miso, natto, sprouts, and other products are produced from food-grade soybeans. Most of the demand for food-grade soybeans comes from Japan and other Asian nations, but soy-based foods have been growing in popularity worldwide. According to a September 2022 non-GMO food-grade soybeans quantification study by the U.S. Soybean Export Council, the largest benefactor of U.S. non-GMO food-grade soybean exports is Japan, which was expected to receive about 657,000 metric tons from the 22 planting season. Taiwan and South Korea are also some of the leading destinations for food-grade soybeans. Some of the leading growers in the U.S. include Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, Iowa, Minnesota, and South Dakota. Most Canadian food-grade soybeans are grown in the fertile soils of Ontario and Quebec between the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River Basin. Mato Grosso is the largest producer at the state level in Brazil and is expected to have local non-GMO production increase by 34% over the last year. In this episode of Whole Grain, we're joined by Chuck Kunich. Chuck's a key figure in the grain industry and serves a dual role at Michigan Agricultural Commodities. While MAC offers several different services and commodities, they do play a significant role in supporting the food-grade soybean market. We'll uncover trends within the food-grade soybean market. We'll also identify the key challenges that existing facilities should expect to face when entering the food-grade soybean market and how they can address these challenges. Chuck will also share some of the regulatory requirements for the industry, and most importantly, you'll learn from Chuck how relationship building is one of the most important keys to building a successful food-grade soybean business. All that and more coming up next. Our guest for today is a very well-connected individual within the grain industry. He has delivered presentations at several grain industry events. He also serves on several boards and committees for various organizations, including serving as the current Jeeps International Board President. His day-to-day work involves dual roles for Michigan Agricultural Commodities as their Corporate Safety Director and as their Food-Grade Grain Business Development Director. So we welcome Chuck Kunich, and thanks for your participation in Whole Grain, Chuck.
Thanks, Jim. Really glad to be on here. I hope some other people get as much out of my presentation as I've got out of other podcasts and webinars that you put on. So hopefully they'll get some good information.
You work to learn more about the industry, even though you have that much experience, the fact that you always continue to grow and develop.
Never too old to learn, Jim.
All right. Now, to allow our listeners to get to know you at the start of the show with a bit of positive spirit, Chuck, could you share with our listeners perhaps a mantra or success quote that you live by professionally?
Yeah, Jim, when you first said that, I've had to think because I didn't know if I had one. But then after thinking about it for a little bit, I did come up with some that have sort of guided me through life. Probably the first and foremost was one that my dad taught me from a very young age, was simply what's right's right and what's wrong. And I've let that try to guide me. And sometimes in business, it's tough. You get into gray areas and then it's easy to cross over to the black area that you don't want to be in. But if you really take it to heart and just think every time, what are you doing? Is that right or is it wrong? That'll help guide you. A couple other ones. I've been lucky to work for some fantastic people in my life. Go into detail on it, but I consider myself a very lucky individual. One, when I went to work for him, my direct supervisor at the time said that Harvey will give you a lot of rope, and it's entirely up to you if you want to use that rope to make a ladder or make a noose. And I've thought of that often because I've been given so many opportunities, and it's just a matter of taking advantage of those opportunities and then doing the job well. And one that sort of fits somewhat with Jeeps, but it also with when I went to work for MAC, I told my boss at the time that as an employee, I work really hard and I have a lot of fun. And I thought about it, and it's easy to think, especially even sometimes with Jeeps, you know, having that fun means going to the bar afterwards and having some drinks with the people you're working with. But as I looked it up more a while ago, it really means also having the good work-family balance in your life. Having fun doesn't necessarily mean just going to the bar. It can mean spending time with your family, doing things that you enjoy that gives balance to your life. So I think those three sort of set the stage for how I try to work and live.
Well, I think they describe you so well. Great advice from your father and from colleagues and just everybody you connect with. So we thank you for your service and continued service. Now, just to provide some context, Chuck, for our whole grain listeners who are joining us from around the world today, Chuck, could you provide a brief overview of your role of Safety Director at the Michigan Agricultural Commodities, and especially about your role as Food Grade Business Development Director and Specialty Soybean Manager? And then also talk a little bit about the role of Michigan Agricultural Commodities. How does it play a role, regionally, nationally, and globally in the greater grain commodities market? I think listeners will find this interesting.
Yeah, sure, Jim. Start with I'm a lifelong Aggie. I grew up on a farm in the thumb of Michigan on Saginaw Bay. At the time I was there, mostly cash crop, but we did have some livestock too. Went to Michigan State to further my education and had several jobs in the U.S. and Canada to hone my skills before I got to MAC. Well, at MAC, where I've worked for about 25 years, for the most part, I ran 2 grain elevators in the thumb of Michigan, each of them about 6 million bushel. Mostly, we were a train loader for corn, soybeans, and wheat at our facilities. We also handled dry edible beans. And then probably 20 years ago, due to some circumstances over at our facilities in Ontario, we got into the food grade soybean business, mainly because we had ADM Windsor on one side of us and Bunge Hamilton on the other. So once we got out of harvest season, it was hard to buy soybeans. So we looked at something that we could branch out, and it worked well for us over in Ontario. And we had a facility at the Marlette plant that I managed that had been an old dry bean plant. And it was quite old. It was actually built back in the 1800s, and we like to kid that it was built 2 years after Lincoln was shot, but that's the truth. And so we revamped it as good as we could with contacts that we already had from Ontario and ones that I built and we built together. We mostly in Asia and Japan as our target. We started working towards getting into that food-grade soybean market. We were lucky that a lot of our growers in the thumb of Michigan and also Southwest Ontario had been dry bean growers, which there's could be 6, 7 different kinds, and maybe one farmer would grow 3. So they already had the knowledge of identity preserved. It was a little different because it wasn't dry beans, it was soybeans. And the big issue was non-GMO as that developed, because especially Japan and many of the other Southeast and Asia and Northern Asia companies, the non-GMO at that time was much more important over there than it was in the U.S. or Canada. And so we just kept developing that, working with different universities to find the seed that would work in Michigan, and eventually met and worked with, I would say, a loose partnership with DF Seeds that was started by John Deal. And he's always been a proponent of non-GMO, even though he helped develop a lot of the GMO varieties. And we developed varieties that work especially well in Michigan and Southeast Ontario. And they have the qualities that those buyers are looking for. Large size beans, high protein, and other factors that we were able to produce. So we've just over the last 20 years have been building on that, getting more customers over in Asia that we've worked with for a long time, and continue to build that business. In the safety side of it, which has come a big part of my life, and a lot of people that my former colleagues and people that I still work today were very surprised when I got into the safety role, because I had probably in the past not been on the top of the safety list. It was more what we needed to get work done, what we needed to do. But about 7 years ago, our current safety director resigned, and our ownership just asked for somebody to fill in till we could find a permanent replacement. And that has now been about 7 years. We've gone through long searches, interviewed people, and just never found that person that we felt fit the needs of MAC. So I did double duty with the safety and also running the facilities in the food grade business. And now I'm not retiring, but I'm stepping aside from some of those other ones and focusing more, especially on the food grade business and also the safety business. And through that, working with safety, I've come to understand how important it is to be able to make sure all your employees get home safe and uninjured every night, and also our customers. You know, when you get all the information from different sources around North America, how many farmers are hurt and killed, it's pretty sobering. And unfortunately, I've had a couple losses in my family, not due to safety, but to understand how losing somebody not just affects that person, but his whole family and all the extended family around it, how important it is to be able to get those people home every night. So I've become pretty fanatical about trying to make that happen. And never will know how much you succeed, because people won't call you up and say, well, I listened to you talk about not going in a grain bin, and so I didn't, and now I'm alive. That just doesn't happen that way. But to know that maybe you could make a small effect or a large effect on somebody's life just because they've heard you maybe tell about the dangers of going in the bin makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Well, it's been 20 years. Your organization, Michigan Agricultural Commodities, has gone into the soybean food grade market 20 years ago. So we're talking about the state of Michigan, United States. We're also talking about Ontario, Canada, as well. So I think for our listeners joining us today, they may be curious. They might be thinking of this. They want to understand maybe the market a little bit, some of the challenges and opportunities that exist there. Maybe first talk about the why a little bit more. Why would grain facilities consider converting some of its infrastructure to support a food grade soybean handling and processing facility? I think it's important to have an understanding of this growing global market. Can you provide just a brief overview of the food grade soybean market and its trends, and what role do grain elevator facilities play in this industry?
Well, it's a large market, and in a lot of instances, it's growing. Some other markets might be shrinking, but we've dealt both with Europe and Asia, and for us, by far, even though Asia is farther away, it's a better market. European market tends to want all the quality and non-GMO factors, but they don't want to pay for it as much. Where Asia, and again, our main target, Japan, is completely non-GMO, and they have their reasons for that, and they think it is worthwhile to them, and they're willing to pay for it. So that market, there isn't enough domestic beans in Japan or the rest of Asia or even China to support that all the non-GMO soybeans that are needed. So they've reached out, and for ours at Michigan Ag, being in Michigan, probably 30 years ago, somebody in Japan figured out that a lot of the environmental conditions that existed in the northern island of Hidaka in Japan, where most of their domestic high-quality soybeans are grown, existed a few other places in North America. And those conditions mainly were the area of the world they're grown on the 44th parallel and also surrounded by water. They have what we call here in Michigan lake effect, which is the weather coming off the lakes or the ocean affects the crops. And there's only about 5 places in the world that have that. And the one is in the northern islands of Japan, and the other is in the Great Lakes states. So we have a lot of the same growing conditions that foster high protein, good quality beans that have the sugar content and a lot of the things that the market in Asia is looking for making tofu or miso or natto. And back 30 years ago, they called them originally IOMs, which was Indiana, Ohio, Michigan beans. And that's what they bought for a long time. Pretty much any bean that was grown, non-GMO bean that was grown in Michigan or those states in Indiana and Ohio were called IOM, but they weren't variety specific for the most part. They were just a bean that was grown here. One of the other conditions that they also want or specifications is they are a clear Highland bean, which means they don't have that little black dot on the bean. And so over the last 30 years, market here in the Great Lakes states and also other areas, Minnesota, Iowa, have worked and developed beans that meet those criteria. But we think that we in Michigan and the Great Lakes states can produce the best quality. So we've worked at that, developed varieties that work consistently to meet the needs of those customers. And one of the reasons why why we've done it and other elevators have done it for grain companies is because it gives extra income, both to the company, the elevator company, and for the producers. They're able to grow a bean that they can get more than just crusher soybean price if they want to work more. And there's a lot that goes into it. It does take more work to make sure, first and foremost, that you are non-GMO. A lot of the ones that we sell at most can be 0.3 GMO and up to 0.1 GMO. So the isolation and how you plant, harvest, where you get the seed from, how they're stored, how you're handled has to be very careful, because just having had regular beans in a truck or a combine and not getting cleaned out well can cause enough contamination that the beans are no longer useful for the non-GMO market. So it takes extra work on everybody's side, the elevator to have facilities that can handle that, and the grower to grow the beans that meet those criteria. So there's more money in the market, but also more work. And it's a small market compared to the crusher market in the world. So marketing becomes even more important, and how many are grown, because it's easy for that market to get short or get long. And so you have to have an understanding of the market to make sure you aren't on the wrong side. and that you're dealing with reputable buyers. On the other side, going into Asia, which you could be dealing with some of the large Japanese trading houses that act as an importer and then go to a wholesaler before going to retail. Some we deal directly with the wholesale market, but it takes knowledge of that market, not just something you want to jump into both feet without feeling it out and knowing about the market or having somebody on staff that's dealt with the market for a while, because there's a lot of pitfalls you want to avoid. But at the end of the day, if you watch your P's and Q's, you do a good job, you manage the business, it's another nice source of income that is different than just the bulk rail or bulk boat business.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Jeep's training and education program is proud to release Introduction to Grain Operations. This new course is a multimedia version of what was known as Jeep's 500, with dynamic graphics, video examples, photographs, multidimensional illustrations, animations, and interactive exercises. This course is sure to prepare your teams for the work you need them to do. This is a great industry primer at a great price. For a limited time, Jeep's members may purchase the course for just $195. Non-members still save and pay just $295. For more information, visit Jeeps.com. So you described some of those challenges when converting to a food grade market. You provided the why, the market in Japan and Eastern regions, but are you seeing this market also increasing in other areas of the world as well?
Yes. Like Japan right now, it's actually a decreasing market because as more fast food McDonald's move in, the younger generation maybe wants to eat more McDonald's hamburgers or French fries than they do tofu. The market has been about 100 million metric tons for years, and it's probably dropped down to maybe 80 million metric tons from that. But then other areas of Southeast Asia, Singapore, Vietnam, even Hong Kong, and going directly into some areas of China, the market's building. And also domestically, more people are, as you know, Jim, concerned with the GMO issue. And so here in the States and in Canada as well, the non-GMO market is building there. As it decreases a little bit in Japan, it's building domestically in other countries. And there's not just all the high grade tofu beans that we deal with. We'll also deal with possibly non-GMO beans that go into animal feeds that don't have the same criteria. Maybe the ones that don't need to be cleaned as well, because they're going to do cleaning at their locations. And we even do some, depending on the market and what's right, we'll do GMO beans. We'll take specific varieties of GMO beans and process them. And some of the countries like Thailand, some of the products that they make, they want some of the specifications as far as the sugars and different things in size and quality, but they don't care about the GMO. So there's a lot of different markets to work in, but it takes time to develop them and understand all the good, bads, and uglies of all those markets. Sometimes I've said, if you're going to deal in this market, you want to stand really straight when you beat your head against the wall so you don't hurt your back. It's a different market. Asia trades different than we do here in North America. Not saying one's right or one's wrong. They're just different. And you need to understand that if you're going to trade in that market, or else you're going to get frustrated a lot early on.
Good points there. Any other considerations for grain elevators converting to a soybean plant, to ensure more successful transition?
Well, that's one of the big things is sort of that probably somewhere have the facilities that you can convert. To go build a brand new food grade soybean plant would take a lot of dollars. There's more equipment that's needed than just in a normal bulk soybean plant. You have to have cleaners to clean the beans, take all the FM and things out. You also have to have gravity tables that separate good beans from lighter diseased beans, and stoners to make sure there's no stones in that. And then now the market's demanding even more tight specifications. We also have gone to Japan and bought and brought back to North America a roller belt system, Harada roller belt, which uses a whole series of belts to be able to keep the nice round beans and remove misshapen beans or other corn or things that are in there. And then as a final, most plants that are shipping to the high quality market have electric eyes or video sorters of some kind. To further, the video sorters take a 360 degree picture of the bean, and if it has imperfections, it'll kick them out. And all this equipment is expensive. And so at both our plants that we had in the U.S., and we have two plants in the U.S. and one in Ontario that we converted, were originally dry bean plants that had some of the base equipment, the gravities, the stoners, some of those things, maybe had an old electric eye. And then, like I say, we imported the roller belts because some of our customers, even though they're made in the U.S., they wanted Japanese-made equipment. And most of the video sorters are made in Japan. And so we had to put those in to be able to provide the product that the market was looking for. And we'll continue to modernize and adapt our plants as we go on because the criteria is going to get tighter, not looser.
Yeah, I bet. Very interesting. And speaking of criteria, I was just curious if you could discuss some of those regulatory requirements that grain elevators should be aware of when entering the food grade soybean market, and how can they ensure compliance with these requirements?
Well, there's some groups that are really good to get yourself aligned with. I'm both a member of SSGA, which is Specialty Soy and Grain Alliance. They help a lot on the export side, how the paperwork needs to be handled, how you do that. Then also USAC, which is the U.S. Export Council. I would say get yourself involved with them. The groups can help you, and then attend the meetings, and you'll meet other people and network with people that'll be willing to help you and learn from that. Two of the things that we're dealing with right now, and an example just to show you how you need to know what you're doing. It was probably 15 years ago. We sent some beans to Japan, and we thought we'd cleaned them really good. But in Michigan, we have white mold problems, and the beans we exported were from a variety that was susceptible to white mold. So when we cleaned them, we still had some of the sclerotia left in there. They sort of look like rat droppings. And they passed, the federal inspectors passed them, no problem. We had all our certificates and everything we needed. But when they got to Japan at the port, the inspectors saw them. So I got called into a conference with our buyer over there, who has been in the miso business for generations, I think 5 or 6 generations now. Mm-hmm. And it was pointed out that this white mold sclerotia, besides infecting soybeans, also infects mulberry trees. And the mulberry tree is where the silkworm feeds and grows, that makes the silk for the Japanese silk market, which is a national treasure. So the way they viewed it, by not making sure my product didn't have any of this in, I was potentially risking their whole national silk market. And, I'd never heard anybody tell me that before. I had to learn that the hard way. So you want to avoid that. But these groups can help. And right now, there's more phytosanitary requirements getting implemented around these markets in Asia. And especially the last one that went on was into Japan, which is a huge deal because to do the phytosanitaries, most of these beans are shipped by container, although some are shipped by vessel. And so if you're shipping by container, you have to have either a state inspector or a federal inspector come out, take the sample, go back, inspect them, and then issue the phytosanitary. Well, Specialty SSGA has worked with the federal government, and one of the first of its kind developed a program where now we can take our own samples and inspect them because we've been trained correctly. And then we send that information into the state, the Michigan Department of Agriculture, and they actually issue the phytosanitary, which saves us immeasurable time because before we were having to fill containers and then wait for that information to come back before we could ship, and then you're dealing with demurrage. So this is a huge thing that they've come up with. And then another program that we're currently working with on is U.S. Identity Preserved. Well, we work with a third party that comes in and inspects what we do and says that our beans meet the criteria and they were grown under the right identity preserved conditions. And so now on our bags or packages can have the U.S. Identity Preserved label. And we're hoping, and I think it's already happened, that label is already showing up in some of the supermarkets in Japan. So we're going to have Japanese customers that ask for and will pay more for U.S. Identity Preserved soybeans. And so there's, like say, a lot more coming down the line to make our product more wanted around the world. But we need to keep adapting to meet that criteria to make it work. It's something that you're going to continually evolve. And you have to be willing to work at it and be able to have the growers that will provide which right now in today's environment is tough, because with the price of soybeans on the COBT having gotten so high before, farmers can tend to say, why do I want to go through all this hassle of doing the non-GMO and potentially risking rejection and things, where I'm making just enough money growing beans on selling them on the CBOT. So now that's another challenge that you have to deal with, that you develop that grower base that'll stay with you and keep producing those in good times and bad. So it's an ongoing challenge, Jim.
Yeah, certainly some examples of challenges there. Not something that you just learn. It's not like a light switch. So you have Jeep's sort of family members, Jeep's members to help you, but you also have some niche groups that have helped you in your organization.
Yep.
So great. People are helping each other out.
Right. And you got to be willing to reach out. People aren't going to come, knock on your door necessarily. You got to be willing to search out those people. And, like we've always said, Jim, with Jeeps, you've got to want to network. You've got to find those people. And, it's all a give and take. A lot of the times you're competitors in the market, but your competitors can help you do your job. And you have to be willing to have it be a give and take, that, the next time somebody might be asking you a similar question, and you've got to be willing to share that information as well.
So much of this is about relationship building, isn't it then?
100%. Both starting with your growers, you need to have those relationships. Then, in the processing business, you need relationships on, how to source different things that are needed, testing equipment, and so on and so forth. And then it goes on, so that can come through other processors, and then on the end use, both with maybe the importers into whichever country you're going to, and the wholesalers, and maybe right down, I've gone into soybean plants and into supermarkets, so I could understand better what was needed. So there's also a lot of travel usually required in this business, because the customers want to know who you are. They want to know who they're dealing with. Relationships is a huge part of the business.
Yeah, it's about building trust as well.
So if you don't want to sit on a plane for 16, 18 hours, it's probably not the business for you.
Yeah, very interesting.
But I've been able to meet and become friends with a lot of amazing people around the world because of this business. Nothing that I ever would have expected a farm boy from the thumb of Michigan would ever do. So it's been a great opportunity for me. And I thank the company MAC that's allowed me to do that business.
Yeah, it's quite the story you have to share with your family and your grandkids. Must be so proud of you. Hey, before we go, I just would like for you to share what this looks like when Michigan Agricultural Commodities and other organizations who have these food grade bean facilities, what does the export process look like in terms of maybe storage? How is it treated differently than non-food grade?
Well, like it starts all the way back. We have a contract that's probably 5 pages long with our growers. And, not that I like legal documents, but I've gone through and put down in paragraph form, the general specs of what we're expecting, what varieties they're going to grow. But then they need to keep all their sales slips, tags off bags. And we have specifications on what they've got to do to clean their planting equipment, their harvesting equipment, their conveyance equipment. And that's all documented. And then either some will store at home on bins they have at home. And then if that's the case, we'll be going out and again have specifications on what they have to do with that. We will be trying to pull samples during the harvest time if they're coming into the elevator, of course, on every truck that comes in. And if they're putting them in their bin at home, we have them save a sample out of each load so we can test them ahead of time and know what quality or if we might have some issues we have to deal with in those bins at home. And then it's done as a buyer's call. They're stored at home. So we will tell them when they can bring them in between January and June. So that's a little different. They just can't always deliver when they want to. The pricing is sort of the same as other contracts, sort of like a basis contract, but we don't call it a basis. We call it a premium only. We specify what that premium is, whether it's $1.50 over Chicago, $2 over Chicago, or $3.50. I've been up to, for some specific varieties, at $5 over Chicago. And some other companies sometimes will just price them over their crusher bid, which is usually less than the Chicago bid due to a negative basis. So the grower really needs to understand that part of it. And then when we bring the beans in, either ones that have been in the elevator from the fall from storage, our customer will tell us what he wants, what variety, when he wants them, and then we'll process them. We'll run them through all that equipment that I talked about earlier. And the majority of our beans will go on 20-foot shipping containers. That's sort of the standard in the industry. We have done some on 40-foot, and then there's also some that have gone on vessel. A lot of times when we do that out of Michigan, because we're a peninsula, and if you're in the thumb of the in Michigan, you're on a peninsula. So freight doesn't leave it easy. So we've shipped rail down to the Ohio River, offloaded them onto barges, which all has to have the same sanitation, and then maybe go down to New Orleans where they're loaded on a vessel. So that does happen. Some of the companies maybe that are out in Kansas or Nebraska, they might be more adjacent to doing more barge business, or if some get grown out in the Pacific Northwest, they might go directly onto ships. But the vast majority is on containers. And then there's, like for us, if we load them, we have to truck them down to Detroit by dray, loaded on container trains down there. Our vast majority of the time we'll go across the U.S. to the West Coast, because if we go out the East Coast and the temperature conditions in Michigan, as opposed to if you're going out the East Coast and going around through the canal, there's too much of a differential in temperatures. If we're shipping in winter, we might be shipping 20-degree beans loaded on a container and then trying to go through the canal at 110 degrees. And that causes mold and problems like that. So the majority of them go out probably to Los Angeles or San Diego, or if up in Canada, could be Vancouver. And then they're loaded on one of the big container ships that everybody sees, and they're shipped over to whichever country they're gone. And that's usually when we set our price. It's landed, whether it's Japan main port, Hong Kong main port, that's where we deliver them to. And usually at that point, our responsibility sort of ends. The buyer has to get them to his facility. But once they get to the facility, if there's a problem with those beans, it's still our problem. And it's a lot of fun going over and selling beans over in Asia. But if you have to go on a claim because of poor quality or some other things, that isn't near as fun. So you want to make sure the beans that you're having landed at a main port in Asia are the quality that they need to be and meet all the specs.
Yeah, a lot involved. Thank you for sharing. Now, Chuck, you've played such a supportive role for your team at Michigan Grain Commodities. And just as you've reached out to others within the Jeep's community throughout your career, you certainly offer the same assistance in helping others through a problem or a challenge that they've encountered in their facility. And now you've shared your perspective on the food grade soybeans business with whole grain listeners around the world. We thank you.
You bet, Jim. Glad to be of service. And, like I say, so many people, especially in Jeeps, has helped me for so many years and made my career that I'd be very amiss if I didn't do the same thing for somebody else that's coming up trying to learn whatever business they're looking at doing that I might have some knowledge on. And I think, and you and I have talked about a lot, I think Jeeps really offers that opportunity.
That kind of brings up how we're going to conclude here, if you don't mind. With that being said, I'd love to start a sentence and would appreciate if you could conclude the sentence. Being part of the Jeeps family means...
Well, I think you just said the word a minute ago, and I sort of was like, oh, you stole my thunder. Being part of a community, Jim. The present community that's working, like now where I'm on the IBD board, that community, but also just the community of regular members, other people that are running businesses, or the associate members who are selling the equipment. I have friends and still communicate probably weekly with them that I worked with at Jeeps 20 years ago. It's a great organization. For the most part, it's not political. We don't want to be political. We'll leave that to somebody else. So we try to leave that at the door. We're just trying as an organization to build and service the grain industry. And it's a great industry to be in. Like, we've said, and I say many times, I'm very proud to help feed and fuel the world. And it sounds maybe a little corny or a little hokey, but I feel that strongly. And at the end of the day, it's true. Maybe it's a small part, but it's still a part.
Chuck, thank you for serving as guest on Whole Grain. It's been an honor and a pleasure to connect with you. Thank you for spending some time with Whole Grain listeners.
Anytime, Jim. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm sure you'll provide them the contact information. If they want to email or call me at any time, I always try to be available.
That's very kind of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jim.
We thank Chuck Kunich for serving as our guest in today's episode of Whole Grain. This episode, like our other episodes of Whole Grain, is super easy to share with others. The Whole Grain podcast can be found in your favorite podcast apps such as Apple Podcast, Pandora, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, and more. Just do a search for Whole Grain. You'll easily find it. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. That way, every episode will be downloaded to your device as soon as it is released, and you can quickly catch up on past episodes as well. Let's continue to support the grain handling and processing industry. We already have listeners from 43 countries at the time of this recording. If you find value in the show, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and leave a comment. That really supports what we do and helps people discover the show more easily. Additionally, you can also connect with the Whole Grain Show on the Jeeps website through jeeps.com/Whole Grain. Access the audio player, review the show notes and links, and access the transcript as well. The Whole Grain Show is a production of Jeeps, the Grain Elevator and Processing Society. The Grain Elevator and Processing Society is the largest organization dedicated to advancing the grain handling and processing industry. Be sure to check out jeeps.com, GEAPS.com. If you and your organization want to sponsor an episode or consider being a guest on the Whole Grain Show, or if you're interested in us producing audio ads to support your product or service, we can help you with that. Please reach out to me, Jim Lenz, Director of Global Training and Education. My email is james@jeeps.com. Make it a great day, and thanks for listening to Whole Grain.